So we were just talking about body dissatisfaction, and I love this ad from the 1920s that talks about clearly it's Drive for Thinness, right? So addressing both men and women to wash their fat away using a special fat reducing soap. Clearly this is no longer on the market, would not be FDA approved because it did not work, but it alludes to the notion that it's been about now 100 years, so since the 1920s, that dieting has been a pretty central focus in our society. So when we think about the word diet, it was originally intended to be a noun, and it refers to just what we eat on a daily basis, our diet, the kind of foods that we eat. So if you take a class in nutrition, they talk about diet. They're usually talking about your diet as a noun, your protein, your carbs, what kinds of foods you eat, all of the things that encompass what's on your plate. It hasn't been until about 100 years ago, with the 1920s, when we became a society focused more on leisure. We had more free time, that we began to be more concerned about our appearance, and dieting, a la the fat reducing soap, became a thing. And then that evolved into many different variations of dieting over the years. So now dieting is often a verb that refers to restriction of food, although in the case of Drive for Muscularity, sometimes there will be an increase in eating certain foods, especially a protein-rich diet, as a way to gain muscle mass. But it typically refers to whatever's on the market, right? The newest quick fix weight loss scheme. I'm on the Hollywood cookie diet, or whatever diet people may be on for that period of time. The problem with that mentality of treating diet as a verb and perpetually being on a diet, and we talked about professional dieters when we talked about the non-food reasons that we eat earlier in the course, is that when you're constantly calorically restricted or restricting the kinds of food that you're eating and you're unhappy about that, it can lead to decreased moods. So we've talked about before, our brain functions on carbs. We need carbs as fuel. And if you're on a low carb diet in particular, often you feel foggy headed and you're not in a good mood. You need carbs for your brain to function, and a lack of carbs often will influence many things, including our mood. We also have then, as we talked about before, negative affect as a result of kind of the loss of control when inevitably the diet fails, and we go on what's called the what the hell effect, which is when we make the decision that the diet isn't working anyway, so we might as well just stop and eat whatever we want, right? And so then we break the diet and we eat whatever we want, and then we feel guilty about it, and then we start over with a different diet, hence the professional dieter. We're preoccupied with thoughts of food because we are hungry all the time. There's a lot of weight fluctuation. We'll talk about that more in our next lecture in terms of what's happening as you're trying to lose weight. Often malnutrition. Some of the diets that are out there on the internet are really just not healthy. They're not good for you. So please do your homework before embarking upon any sort of new way of eating, and can be potentially psychologically and physically damaging. The malnutrition, depending on the lack of nutrients you're getting in your diet, can cause a variety of different physical ailments to occur, and then ultimately lead to things like eating disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, if we are equating our sense of self-worth with what we find on our plate and our weight. So there are many kinds of diets. You Google top diets of 2021, and you'll get a slew of diets that you can investigate. But they tend to, at least right now, go into one of three different categories. There's the high protein, low carb, the Atkins, the Zone, the paleo kinds of diet. There's a low fat diet, the Weight Watchers, the Jenny Craigs. There's the high fat, low carb, the keto diet. Some of these diets are calorically restricted. Some of them are not. It just depends on which nutrition plan, which diet you are following. And throughout history, we have everything from Karo syrup to fat slimming soap to tapeworms to all kinds of things that we have done to ourselves in an effort to lose weight. So you can Google what and come up with hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of diets. What should you eat? I promised you that I was not going to tell you that. But what I will say, building on what we've talked about before with health and nutrition, is if you Google the healthiest diets, the best diets, the things that keep coming up, there's a few key things that keep coming up. So the first two, Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, are very, very similar. The idea is a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot of whole foods, olive oil, fish. The DASH diet goes even further, getting rid of high-fat dairy, discourages high saturated fat foods, sugar-sweetened beverages and sweets, caps sodium. That's specifically an approach to stop hypertension. So you'll see when you're researching for yourself what's the best way for me to eat. If you go on the internet and you Google best or most healthy diet, you'll probably hear some variation of the Mediterranean diet. Another one that you're going to see a lot of, and I'm really glad it's out there, is that the flexitarian diet, which is this idea that you don't have to cut out things, right? And so flexitarian is often talking more about cutting out meat and fish and being more vegetarian, more veggie-based, more whole food-based. But the whole premise of the diet is that you're not getting rid of everything. You can be flexible. Maybe you eat quote unquote good most of the time, but you allow yourself cheat days or cheat meals, or you go to a birthday party and you're going to have the freaking cake and it's okay. And so some of the articles that you'll see in our module this week kind of allude to this fact that it's okay to eat dessert, right? So that's actually one of the articles in your supplemental folder. Dietitian talks about why she eats dessert. So this notion that, yes, we want you to eat healthy. Yes, we want you to eat real food, whole foods. Again, the plate that we talked about in week 1, emphasis on a lot of fruits and veggies. Make sure you get your lean protein in there. Make sure you get some healthy fats. But be flexible with yourself, right? Have variety. There's no right way to eat for everybody. So again, just kind of recapping that notion from week 1. Why do we diet? So diet as a verb started because of weight loss, right? So in the 1920s, this was the flapper era. The Dapper Dan era was kind of the equivalent for men in the 1920s. And it was thin as possible. No curves, just kind of like a straight stick figure. And so weight loss has been, for many, the primary goal of dieting. But there are other reasons. So as I said, depending on your goals for your body, sometimes you quote unquote diet actually to bulk up. So you eat specific foods in an effort to gain weight or to gain muscle mass. Sometimes there's pressure to fulfill societal norms of beauty and fitness that influence our dietary habits, hence like the JLo diet, right? So there's a lot of diets out there that are celebrity focused. There's also kind of some of the things that we worry about as psychologists and RDs worry about when we start using food as a symbol of control and power, especially if we're food restricting as a way to exhibit our sense of control and our power over our own lives. So when we start to see, especially kids, that are food restricting as a way to control their lives, if left untreated, that can sometimes lead to an eating disorder. So that's when we worry. Defiance, negative affect, impulsivity, eating because we're mad, or in defiance of what someone has said, you can't eat that, so we eat it anyway. Again, if we're seeing it as kids, sometimes that we worry because it can lead to binge eating of things that our parents have told us not to eat just because we want to defy them. So what have we become? And so I want to go back to week 1 and week 2 when we were talking about reasons that we eat, and we were talking about food-related reasons and also non-food related reasons. So why do we make choices that are not always healthy for us? So we've talked about non-food related reasons for eating before. And so I just want to give you a little recap, right? So when we take a step back in time to when we were toddlers, we were really good at eating when we were hungry and stopping when we were full. But between 3 to 5, we began to learn that there are rules around our food intake. And we learn those rules, our food ways. We've talked about that before, from our parents, from our culture, from our friends, from our family, from media, from teachers, whoever was around us when we were in our formative years. We begin to learn that, yes, you may eat when you're hungry, but also you eat for social reasons like Thanksgiving or Christmas, other holidays, religious reasons, birthday party, right? Emotional reasons, food as comfort. We eat because we smell it or we taste it and it causes that automatic salivation even if we're not hungry. And so we keep eating even though we're full. So as we grow up, what this can turn into is that we learn to ignore our internal cues. We learn to ignore hunger, we learn to ignore taste, smell, and we end up making food choices not because we're hungry or because we're thirsty, but because we've conditioned ourselves to eating certain things for certain reasons. And so this gets back to the non-hunger related reasons for eating when we were talking about people who mindlessly eat. The waste not, want not, the chaotic eaters. For whatever reason, if you learned growing up that food was scarce and you should just eat it all when you had the opportunity, even if you're now in a spot where food is not scarce and you have plenty to eat. This conditioned hyper eating, where we're eating based on these different rules because food is there, because we don't want to waste it, ends up leading to problems. And so individuals who have this conditioned hyper eating from childhood tend to be more likely to be overweight. They don't know anymore what hunger feels like, what fullness feels like, because they've ignored their body's cues for so long. They also tend to crave high-fat diets. Often food as coping mechanism was part of childhood, and so that can lead to some short-term memory loss, actually, because of the high-fat content in the diet, and an inability to use oxygen to make energy needed to move. And so they're less motivated to exercise or to change their eating habits because they're very lethargic because of their current eating habits. Again, mood regulation. A lot of us, especially in the US, especially if you're female, although males learn this as well, emotional eating, eating to make yourself feel better when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you're bored, when you're lonely. Insert reason. We kind of learn, again, from pretty early ages in the US that food is a coping mechanism. And so again, that conditioned hyper eating can sometimes come from the fact that we don't learn effective coping strategies for dealing with our stress, our anger, our depression, or anxiety, or whatever we're trying to deal with. Instead, we've learned to eat as a way to mask our feelings. So we end up then eating too much, right? We eat for quote unquote the wrong reasons, all of our food rules. If we violate a food rule, we feel guilty about violating that food rule. We then sometimes will diet, as in weight loss diet, to try to make up for the fact that we've eaten the wrong, quote unquote, wrong food. We've broken a food rule, or we exercise because we've broken a food rule. And then we deprive ourselves of the very things that we're craving. And then that sets us up for diving headfirst into the ice cream because we've just deprived ourselves of ice cream and we love ice cream. And so deprivation sets up for this mentality that eventually you're gonna give, right? Eventually you're gonna make the choice to eat the food that you have denied yourself, and then you feel guilty about it. And so then we're back into that vicious cycle of dieting leading to guilt, leading to more dieting, leading to more guilt, and you become a professional dieter. So intuitive eating, we've talked about this before when we were talking about the different styles of eating, but this is really what we grew up with, right? So babies are born as intuitive eaters. We know from studies of early childhood that left to their own devices, little kids, 2, 3, 4, they do fine. They eat the exact right amount of calories to meet their growing needs at that age. They eat the right carb, protein, fat ratio. They eat, given a variety of healthy food choices, they make good choices. But again, ages 3 to 5 is typically when our well-meaning parents are trying to teach us how to be healthy, and they introduce food rules, and we forget that our body actually knows what it's doing. And so now we're adults, and we've lost the ability to feel hunger or fullness. We're out of touch with what our own body needs, what our own body is actually craving. So intuitive eating is this notion invented by a couple of RDs, but now you'll see a lot of registered dietitians, nutritionists, health coaches, etc., talking about intuitive eating. There's actually a book about it called Intuitive Eating if you're really interested in that. So they have 10 principles, which are to, just stop the dieting, get rid of the food rules, honor your hunger, like get reconnected with your body's own satiety signals. When are you hungry? When are you full? Learn to recognize that. Get rid of the rules, right? Make peace with food. Don't have the deprivation. Don't have the things you can't eat unless they make you sick, right? That's fine. Challenge the food police. So if you have people in your life that are putting those restrictions on you, learn how to stand up to them and be like, hey, it's my body. I'm the one in charge of knowing what's best for me, and I'm going to eat this because I want to eat it, or I'm choosing not to eat this because it makes me sick, or whatever your reason may be. Learning to respect when you're hungry and when you're full. Rediscovering, as you do that, then rediscovering what you really enjoy eating and what makes you feel satisfied. Honor your feelings without using food, so coping mechanisms that are appropriate for the problem at hand, respecting your body, moving in some way, and then honoring your own health. So if there's health conditions that you're battling with, depression or hypertension or whatever, that you're eating in a way that's appropriate to support you being healthy and while still listening to your body.